A major development today in the Conservative leadership race. An Ontario court has ruled that Jim Karahalios can be allowed back in as a candidate. He was kicked out in March for making remarks rival candidate Erin O'Toole complained were racist. The CBC's Catherine Cullen joins us with more on this. Hey, Catherine.
Hey, Vashi.
So walk us through how all of this played out. Originally, why Mr. Karahalios, was kicked out of the race.
Yeah, we've got to cast our mind back to pre-pandemic times, Vashi, when the Conservative leadership race was just trucking along as about normal. February, March, Jim Karahalios, somebody who is considered, he's been called a gadfly. He is Mr. Axe the carbon tax. He is considered a provocateur by some. He's been involved in legal battles with the Ontario PC party. Well, he sends out some messages, Facebook, email, whatnot, in which he says that Mr. O'Toole's campaign chair is in favor, according to Mr. Karahalios, of Sharia law. Erin O'Toole not too happy about this. He goes to the Conservative Party's chief returning officer and says, I'm not happy about this. I think it's racist. I think he should be disqualified from the race. At this point, we descend in something to a word salad of party politics. You've got the CRO, you've got the DRAC, the LEOC, the Leadership Election Organizing Committee. Various pieces of the Conservative infrastructure get involved here. And what they decide to do, ultimately it is the DRAC, one of those committees, says Mr. Karahalios is out of the race. Now, an Ontario court judge has said that committee, well, they can't kick Mr. Karahalios out of the race. That particular committee doesn't have the authority to do that. Mr. Karahalios does say, listen, I'm not racist. And frankly, he believes the party is out to get him. The judge said there is no evidence of that, but certainly that this particular committee did not have the authority. So he's going to be reinstated as a candidate, but he certainly has at least one challenge in front of him, Bashi. He has to raise $100,000 in the next couple of weeks because he racked up some fines and penalties related to those remarks that he made. The other thing to consider in all of this is another piece of that word salad, the Leadership Election Organizing Committee, LEOC. They do still have the power to boot Mr. Karahalios out of the race, so they need to take a look at this situation. The judge says they need to be open-minded, but they can consider whether or not he should still be a candidate in this race if they choose to.
Yeah, my understanding of the decision was specifically that LEOC completely has that power. The judge was pretty explicit about that. And I also understand that they don't need a new complaint, for example, to investigate his leadership. They can meet tomorrow, if they so choose, and decide that Mr. Karahalios can't be a candidate. I'll ask him about that in a moment. But overall, this is one of the only things that is happening on the sidelines of the pandemic that isn't focused on the spread of COVID-19. But what does it mean for the race?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly if Jim Karahalios really is back in this race, it's quite a shakeup. When you look at the nature of the particular complaint that he was facing here, he is not somebody who is afraid to, let's say, push the envelope, certainly offend other candidates to the point that he had Mr. O'Toole alleging that some of the comments that he had made were racist. So it would certainly really shake up the race. The question is whether or not he will indeed remain in the race. What is the correct committee, now that we've gotten to that point, going to decide to do? Mr. Karahalios, to, a provocateur, just his comments, even though he wouldn't necessarily be considered in the top tier of candidates because he does like to shake things up, it could shake this race up. So what's going to happen? Certainly we asked the Conservative Party for comment. They made a point of noting in a statement that the judge did find that there was no bias against Mr. Karahalios. They say that they're looking at all of this, trying to decide what to do right now. Mr. Karahalios looking at how he can get back in the race. I did ask Mr. O'Toole's camp for a comment as well. They say essentially this is between Jim Karahalios and LEOC, the Leadership Election Organizing Committee. I got it right there, Bash.
I appreciate you making sense of that word salad very much, Catherine. The CBC's Catherine Cullen with that update. So will Karahalios jump back into the race? Jim Karahalios joins me from Cambridge, Ontario. Hi, Mr. Karahalios. Good to see you again.
Thank you for having me, Bashi.
Are you going to try to get back in the race following this decision?
Well, today we had an important decision for the rule of law. Disqualification was overturned, but the courts don't allow for judicial review. And so there's a CRO ruling that stands that has put me at a disadvantage for this race. I have to come up with $100,000, so a $400,000 buy-in. The other four candidates had a $300,000 buy-in. We haven't heard from the party since the court's decision. There's donations that we've sent that are still at the post office. They haven't picked up for 2 months. They haven't opened up the online donor portal where people can directly donate to the party, to my campaign. So unless we've got the party willing to play ball here and run a fair race and accept donations for my campaign, I physically don't have a way right now to collect donations to send to them for the extra $100,000. And the CRO in this race has wide latitude to do whatever he wants. He's got more power than Andrew Scheer in our party. And I'm hoping the party will respond to our campaign and ensure that a fair process is going to continue the rest of the way, not sanction one candidate, me, $100,000 for campaign communications, and not sanction the rest when they've been criticized for their own positions.
The argument that you just put forth about the fairness of the process was fundamental to the case that you presented as well. And in the decision, one part, well, many parts, but one part in particular speaks to that. In my opinion, the process afforded Mr. Karahalios was fundamentally fair. In essence, what the judge said was you knew what you were signing up for, the powers that the party had to make judgments when it came to your candidacy. You agreed to those conditions, and as a result, there was nothing unfair about the process. So why do you come to the conclusion now that there was something unfair?
So the judge makes that decision on the evidence provided. And when the party goes to court, doesn't provide affidavits from the CRO or the appeals committee members who made the decision. Only one individual of the LEOC provided an affidavit. We don't know what the discussions were amongst the election organizing committee that led to the CRO's $100,000 fine. And look, you've seen other candidates in this race make campaign communications that have been criticized. They have yet to be sanctioned. So obviously the rules are being applied differently to my campaign communications and theirs. And the judge said the evidence on the file in a 2-month trial was not enough to come to that conclusion. But I had to go to court to get a disqualification. And the courts do not review internal decisions of political parties on their merits. They only review whether the party followed the rules as written. So what that means is that a judge can't look at the CRO's sanction of $100,000 and say whether that was flawed or not, because it clearly was flawed if you read our policy declaration and you read our Constitution. But that's outside the judge's scope in this review. He can only look at the rules and decide whether disqualification was fair.
I'll read for our viewers exactly what he said. I paused to say and to foreshadow that it is not for the court to say whether the substantive aspects of the CRO's ruling, and I should say this is the ruling that decided it, so our viewers who might not be aware of all the circumstances of the case, that's the ruling that decided that the communication you sent out that Mr. O'Toole complained about went against the rules, and they penalized you for that. So the judge said it is not for the court to say whether the substantive aspects of the CRO's ruling were unreasonable, reasonable, true, or correct. But the judge also goes on to say that even though you tried to argue that it should be that there should be a judgment on that, Mr. Karahalios was not a witness to some of the major events upon which his case is built. Mr. Karahalios, who was cross-examined, told his story and provided a great deal of hearsay evidence, some of which was told to him by persons who Mr. Karahalios wished to keep confidential to protect their privacy. His case is largely built upon what happened at telephone conference calls or meetings at which he was not present. So you're making some pretty substantive claims, Mr. Karahalios, against the party, against their motivations, and the judge says that those are baseless.
I don't think he said they're baseless. I think he said that I don't have the evidence to go to court and ask the judge to decide why I was sanctioned $100,000 and other candidates in this race were not. And that's the reality of the situation when decisions are made in secret. But Vashi, you have to ask yourself, if everything was up on the up and up, how come they didn't disclose in the court process what the discussions were amongst the LEOC that led to the CRO fining me $100,000? How come only one person provided affidavit evidence? So there's obviously stuff that they didn't want to reveal to the public. And when the judge makes those comments, he's making it on the evidentiary record that's available to me and what's provided. And if the party's not coming forward with that information in a trial, I'm not in a very good position in a short 1-month trial to access those documents in that discussion. But at the end of the day, they disqualified me from a race, Vashi. They didn't follow their own rules, and the judge decided that. And
the judge decided the wrong people disqualified you, right? The people who ultimately said you couldn't be a candidate for leadership, that was the wrong grouping of people. But he did say that LEOC had the power to do so. And you know from the rules you signed up to that LEOC can do that.
Right, and they voted and they didn't disqualify me. And then the other committee that didn't follow their own rules removed me from the ballot. Those are the facts.
So the question is then, if this does go back to LEOC, Is it your understanding, it's my understanding based on this ruling, and I could be wrong, but that if that question were to be put in front of LEOC and LEOC were to decide you are no longer a candidate, that according to this ruling, they have the ability to do so?
So you have to ask yourself, why is double jeopardy happening in this situation when they voted once already and didn't disqualify me? And why are those deliberations not happening for the other candidates in the race who've made inflammatory comments that have been criticized both inside and outside the party? You have to ask yourself that question on that hypothesis. The party might decide to dig in here and not allow a fair race to happen. I know that when I was removed from the ballot, I was in third place with donations. I've never had access to the 300,000 emails of the party list that the other four candidates had. We reached the $300,000 in donations despite that, and we're climbing in popularity and support across this country. And those are all facts in this case. And so I don't know. It's
also a fact, with respect, Mr. Carlios, it's also a fact, according to the judge, that the party, until Aaron O'Toole launched this complaint, did nothing to stand in the way of your candidacy. And actually, the judge found merit to Aaron O'Toole's complaint levied against you, saying it's not a stretch to say that this is a case of race baiting, defined in the Oxford Dictionary as the unfair use of statements about race to try to influence the actions or attitudes of a particular group of people. He went on to say that you're a smart person, you trained as a lawyer, and that you tried to walk a line. You were careful to use specific quotes.
That I was race baiting.
Yeah,
and I quoted Aaron O'Toole's campaign chair, and I said I disagree with him. That's all fair and on the record. If he thought I said something libelous, he could have sued me. I reject. Look, I've been maligned from the top, and anytime you fight the establishment and whether they follow their own rules, I continually get maligned, and that's fine. We can continue maligning me after I just won in court for a party not following their own rules. And I reject the premise of the statement. I've rejected it from day one.
Do you reject the judge's ruling, though, on it? Do you reject the judge's comments on it?
The judge's ruling is that I won. And the fact of the matter is Aaron O'Toole filed a complaint to remove me from the race when he himself sent an email out criticizing and taking the same position that I did, using more inflammatory language than I did on Sharia law in this country.
The judge explicitly...
he was not sanctioned.
No, the judge explicitly said, it all combined to a conclusion that it appears that Mr. Karahalios was trying to do precisely what he says that he was not, using charged and Islamophobic language to attack a fellow candidate and a campaign volunteer in order to score points. That's from the judge. Those are the words of the judge.
No. That's Vashi. That's not what the judge said. The judge copied and pasted what the CRO said in his decision. And the judge said that he is not in a position to take a review of the CRO's ruling. He copied and pasted what the CRO said about me, and he hasn't sanctioned or investigated any other candidate in this race. That's the CRO's opinion, and he has a lot of power in this race. The judge did not weigh in on a critique of my communication because there was nothing there on that.
But doesn't the CRO have the power to make that decision?
The CRO under these rules has the power to make flawed decisions, and the court can't intervene. That's our legal system in this country. It's a vacuum when it comes to what political parties do when they apply the rules, and it has to be a clear violation of them breaking the rules, just like they did when they removed me from the ballot. But don't quote what the CRO said and suggest that that's what the judge said, because he didn't say that. The CRO said that. And you got to ask yourself, why is the CRO saying that about me for saying I disagree with the statements published in a newspaper about a campaign chair in this race? And he hasn't said it about the other four candidates in this race, three of them who've used very inflammatory language in this race.
Have there been specific complaints levied against those candidates, though? Isn't that part of the process? Like Aaron O'Toole made a complaint about you.
The CRO has the power to investigate a complaint or deny it. In this case, he decided to proceed. He also has the power to start his own investigation. So if the rule of law and the rules are being applied fairly, you got to ask yourself, why is he green-lighting an investigation from Aaron O'Toole, who I am his biggest threat in the race, running as a blue Tory on the right, and he's not opening up an investigation for other inflammatory language that the other candidates made in this race? It's not, you can't just hide behind the fact that a competitor in this race used this as a political tool to file a complaint about me, and the other candidates in this race haven't done the same thing. So it's okay to disqualify a guy if his competitor complains about him, but we'll turn a blind eye to other comments made.
So let me ask you then, at the end of the day, Leoc still does, according to the judgment, have, or the decision, the power to decide whether or not you remain as a candidate. The stuff you're talking about now, you're ascribing motive to a lot of the people who work on Leoc, who make these decisions ultimately. Do you think that's ultimately going to help your case? You want to remain as a candidate, right?
Well, if they're neutral officials running a race, Vashi, is that even a question you should be asking me? Should they be keeping quiet and behind closed doors the decisions and the motivations for their decisions and not disclosing it in the court process or to the members at large? If you're a neutral official running a race, should you be weighing in on my campaign communications and sanctioning me $100,000 and letting the other candidates off the hook? What's the difference?
But the judge did say nothing was wrong with that. Like, the judge was pretty unequivocal. Nothing was wrong with the process.
Vashi,
except for who decided ultimately.
Vashi, he said the rules provide the CRO with broad language to interpret policy communications, and the court doesn't have the jurisdiction under our legal system to do a judicial review of what the CRO decides in the case. He didn't say that everything the CRO did was fine, because he didn't review what the CRO did.
No, but he said the CRO had the power to make that decision.
Under these rules, because the CRO, under the rules that...
But those are the rules you knew existed.
The rules that I signed up for were a take it or leave it proposition that I thought were going to be applied equally to all the candidates in this race. That's what the rule of law is. And in this scenario, they're applying it differently to me than the others. The courts have always been reluctant, Vashi, to find a decision against the political party in this country. I don't think you can pull up any other person in Canada that's beat a political party in court in the middle of an election. I've been persecuted by the PC party suing me. I won. And now I've taken the Conservative Party to court because they withheld my campaign contributions and illegally disqualified me from a race. And I won. And those are the facts. And we don't have a legal system that allows the courts or Elections Canada to take more of a role in an internal party election to make sure the rules are applied fairly. So it's up to the party. It's up to the leadership committee and the CRO and the appeals committee. Do they want to run a fair race? Are they going to start accepting my campaign contributions? Are they going to put me on a level playing field with the other candidates or not? It's up to them.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Mr. Karahalios. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.